I never liked driving at night. Something about the darkness stretching endlessly on either side of the road always made me uneasy. But that night, I had no choice. I had to make the trip to my sister's house, a good 3 hours away. It was already past midnight, and the highway was empty, quiet, except for the hum of my engine and the occasional chirp of crickets. The road stretched ahead of me, disappearing into the blackness. The headlights illuminated only a few feet in front of the car, and beyond that, it was nothing but darkness. I turned on the radio, hoping for some distraction, but the only station I could pick up was static. I drove in silence for what felt like hours, the monotony of the empty highway starting to lull me into a trance. My eyes felt heavy, and I could feel the drowsiness creeping in. I slapped my face a couple of times to wake myself up, shaking my head and taking deep breaths. I couldn't afford to fall asleep behind the wheel. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something moving on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, or maybe a deer. But then it happened again, a shadow, darting along the edge of the highway, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I squinted, trying to make out what it was, but it was too fast. I told myself it was nothing, just the darkness playing tricks on me. But the feeling of unease only grew stronger. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I pressed the gas pedal a little harder, eager to put more distance between myself and whatever was out there. A few minutes later, it happened again. This time, I was sure I saw something. A figure running alongside the car. It moved quickly, almost unnaturally, keeping pace with my vehicle. My heart raced as I glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing behind me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a wild animal. Maybe I was imagining things because I was so tired. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I glanced at the dashboard. The gas gauge was dropping faster than it should have been. I hadn't been driving that long, but the needle was already nearing the red zone. I cursed under my breath. The last thing I wanted was to get stranded on this desolate highway in the middle of the night. As I rounded a bend in the road, I saw a sign ahead, gas station 5 miles. Relief washed over me. I could fill up the tank, stretch my legs, and maybe shake off the strange feeling that had been nagging at me since I'd seen those shadows. The gas station came into view a few minutes later, a small, lonely building on the side of the road. It looked old and worn, with a single flickering neon sign that barely lit up the lot. The place didn't look inviting, but I didn't have much of a choice. I pulled into the station, stopping beside one of the pumps. As I stepped out of the car, the cold night air hit me, sending a shiver down my spine. The silence was overwhelming. There were no other cars, no other people. Just me, the gas pump, and the endless dark road behind me. I reached for the gas nozzle, but something caught my eye, a movement in the corner of the lot. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to look. There was a man standing by the entrance to the gas station's convenience store. He was tall, dressed in a long coat, his face hidden in shadow. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring in my direction. I froze. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Should I go inside and ask for help? Or should I get back in my car and leave as fast as I could? Before I could make a decision, the man took a step toward me. I dropped the gas nozzle, my heart pounding in my chest. I quickly fumbled with my keys, unlocking the car door and scrambling inside. My hands shook as I shoved the key into the ignition, my eyes flicking back to the man. He was closer now, his pace slow and deliberate, like he knew I had nowhere to go. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into drive. Without even thinking, I sped out of the gas station, the tires screeching as I veered back onto the highway. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The road ahead was dark, the shadows even thicker now. I kept my foot pressed to the gas pedal, pushing the car faster than I should have. The eerie feeling hadn't left me, and I couldn't shake the sense that something, or someone, was still following me. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see the man from the gas station. But instead, I saw something worse. There was a figure in the back seat of my car. I let out a gasp, swerving the car dangerously as I struggled to keep control. My eyes darted between the road and the mirror, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure was sitting perfectly still, shrouded in darkness, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't dare speak. I just kept driving, my mind racing with fear. How had it gotten into my car? What did it want? The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just sat there, like it was waiting for something. I drove faster, the highway blurring around me. My only thought was to get away, to find safety, but I didn't know where to go. There were no other cars, no signs of life, just the endless road stretching into the night. Finally, up ahead I saw it, another gas station. This one was bigger, brighter, with lights that cut through the darkness. I pulled into the lot, my tires screeching as I came to a stop. I jumped out of the car, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't look in the back seat. I couldn't. I just ran toward the gas station's convenience store, my hands shaking as I pushed open the door. The clerk behind the counter looked up, startled. He was an older man, with a weathered face and a friendly smile that did little to calm my nerves. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. I shook my head, gasping for breath. There's something in my car." The man's smile faded. He glanced out the window at my car, then back at me. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I cried. "I saw something. Someone. In the back seat, it just—" Before I could finish, the man raised his hand, silencing me. His eyes narrowed as he looked out at my car again. Slowly, he walked around the counter and stepped outside. I stood frozen in the doorway, too scared to move. The clerk approached my car cautiously, peering through the windows. After a moment, he opened the back door and looked inside. Then, he turned back to me, his expression unreadable. "There's nothing here," he said. I blinked, confused. "What?" "But I saw—" "There's no one in your car," the man repeated, his voice firm. "You must be tired. Long night on the road?" I hesitated, my mind spinning. Had I imagined it? Was I so tired that I'd hallucinated the whole thing? The man smiled again, though it didn't reach his eyes this time. "It happens to a lot of folks driving this late. The mind plays tricks." I nodded slowly, though I wasn't entirely convinced. But what else could I do? I thanked the clerk, got back into my car, and drove off. The rest of the drive was a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I tried to convince myself that it had all been in my head, that there was no figure in my back seat, no man at the gas station who had followed me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I never drove at night again after that. And to this day, whenever I glance in my rearview mirror, I can't help but wonder if something or someone is watching. I had just finished my last exam of the semester and felt relieved. It was a chilly Friday evening, and I wanted to celebrate with friends. But first, I had to catch the last bus home. The bus stop was just down the street from the campus, and I hurried to make it in. As I walked, the sky turned dark, and the wind picked up. The trees swayed, their leaves rustling like whispers. I glanced at my watch. I had 10 minutes before the bus arrived. I was glad I wasn't running late, but a strange feeling settled in my stomach. When I reached the bus stop, I was alone. The streetlights flickered, casting shadows across the pavement. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. I sighed, wondering if I should have waited for a friend to walk with me. After a few minutes, the sound of an engine broke the silence. I looked down the road and saw headlights approaching. Relief washed over me as the bus pulled up to the stop, its doors creaking open. I climbed aboard, greeting the driver. He was an older man with a gray beard and tired eyes. "Evening," he said with a nod. I found a seat near the back and settled in, looking forward to the ride home. As the bus pulled away from the stop, I noticed how quiet it was. Usually there were other students chatting and laughing, but tonight I was the only passenger. The driver kept his eyes on the road, the engine humming softly. The bus took a familiar route, winding through the dark streets of the city. The lights from the buildings flashed by, and I tried to relax. But the further we went, the more uneasy I felt. The streets grew emptier, the buildings farther apart, until we were surrounded by trees and shadows. "Is this the right way?" I asked, breaking the silence. The driver glanced in the mirror, his expression blank. "Just a shortcut," he said. I nodded, but I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. The trees outside loomed larger, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. A few minutes later, the bus slowed down and the driver turned onto a dirt road. "This isn't right," I muttered under my breath. I looked out the window, the darkness closing in around us. "Are you okay back there?" the driver called out, his voice echoing in the quiet. "Yeah, just wondering where we're going," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Trust the route," he said. "It's quicker this way." I shifted in my seat, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. I wanted to get off the bus, but there were no stops in sight. The road was bumpy, and the trees pressed in closer, blocking out the little light there was. After a few more minutes, I noticed something strange. The bus seemed to be moving slower, almost like it was struggling to keep going. I glanced at the driver, but he was still focused on the road, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. "Is there something wrong?" I asked, my voice tinged with worry. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned to look at me, and I felt a chill run through me. His eyes were dark, almost lifeless, and I could see something unsettling in his gaze. "Everything's fine," he said finally, but his voice had changed. It was lower, almost gravelly, sending a wave of fear. Just then, the bus came to a halt. The driver turned off the engine, and the lights flickered before going out completely. We were plunged into darkness. What's happening?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Just a little delay," he said, his tone unnaturally calm. "Don't worry." I fumbled for my phone, hoping for a light, but it was dead. My heart raced as I realized I was completely cut off from the world. "I need to get off," I said, my voice trembling. The driver turned to me slowly, a strange smile creeping onto his face. "This is where the fun begins." Before I could react, he reached under his seat and pulled out a flashlight. He shined it around the bus, illuminating the dark corners. "Welcome to my special route." I felt the color drain from my face. "What do you mean?" He stood up, still smiling as he walked toward me. "You see, not everyone makes it home on the last bus." Panic surged through me. "What are you talking about?" The people who take this bus don't usually return," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They become part of the night." I scrambled back in my seat, desperate to get away from him. "You can't do this. Let me off." But the driver just laughed, a chilling sound that echoed in the darkness. "It's too late for that." Suddenly, I heard something outside the bus, a rustling noise, followed by whispers. My breath quickened as I pressed my back against the window. Shadows moved outside, darting between the trees. "Help!" I screamed, but the driver only laughed again. The shadows grew closer, and I could see figures emerging from the darkness, people with hollow eyes and blank expressions, their bodies moving in strange ways. They surrounded the bus, reaching out as if trying to get in. "Let me out!" I cried, pounding on the window, but it wouldn't budge. The figures pressed closer, their faces twisted in despair. The driver walked back to his seat, still grinning. "You're one of us now," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You'll never leave." I felt a wave of despair wash over me as I realized I was trapped. My mind raced, searching for a way out. The shadows outside moved closer, their whispers growing louder. In a moment of desperation, I lunged for the emergency exit at the back of the bus. I pulled it open, the cold air rushing in. Without thinking, I jumped out and hit the ground, rolling into the dirt. I scrambled to my feet and started running, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the bus behind me, the driver's laughter fading as I put distance between us. The figures followed, their voices echoing through the trees. I ran as fast as I could, my breath coming in quick gasps. The forest was dark and thick, branches grabbing at my clothes, but I didn't stop. I had to escape. As I ran, I could see lights in the distance. Hope surged through me as I sprinted toward them. The whispers faded behind me, and I felt a sense of freedom. Finally, I broke through the trees and stumbled into a clearing. Before me stood a small gas station, its lights shining brightly. I dashed inside, gasping for breath. The clerk looked up, concern etched on his face. "What? There's a bus. Something's wrong with it," I exclaimed, my voice shaking. He frowned, glancing outside. "What bus?" The last one. But when I looked back, there was nothing. The road was empty and the forest stood still. The clerk shook his head, puzzled. There haven't been any buses around here for hours. My heart dropped. Had I imagined it all? Was it some trick of my mind? I need to use your phone, I said urgently. He nodded, pointing to the phone on the wall. I grabbed it, dialing my friend's number, desperate for someone to come get me. As the phone rang, I turned back toward the door, watching the dark road. I could see something moving in the shadows, figures slipping between the trees, their hollow eyes staring at me. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I realized I was still being watched. Suddenly, the phone clicked, and my friend's voice came through. "Hello? I'm at the gas station," I shouted, relief flooding me. "You have to come get—" "What gas station?" they asked, confusion in their voice. I opened my mouth to respond, but then I noticed the clerk's face pale. He was staring outside, his expression turning to one of fear. I turned to look, and my heart sank. The bus had returned, headlights piercing the darkness. The driver stepped out, his smile wide and unnatural. The shadows danced around him, whispering and swirling like smoke. "Let's go, friend," he called out, his voice echoing in the night. "No, stay away," I yelled, backing away from the door. The figures surrounded the gas station, their faces twisted in despair, their hands reaching for me. I felt trapped, caught between the darkness outside and the fear within. "Come back to us," the driver said, his voice low and enticing. I hung up the phone and turned to the clerk, panic rising in my chest. "We need to get out." But the clerk only shook his head, backing away. "You don't understand. They'll take you." I felt a wave of despair wash over me. The darkness outside grew thicker, and I could hear their whispers growing louder, urging me to join them. With no other choice, I bolted for the back door, bursting outside into the cold night air. The figures moved closer, their eyes shining with a haunting. I ran toward the woods, the shadows trailing behind me. I could hear the driver's laughter echoing in the darkness, taunting me as I fled. But I was determined to escape. I sprinted into the trees, feeling the branches scratch against my skin. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stop. The whispers followed me, growing fainter as I pushed deeper into the forest. I kept running, my heart pounding, until I finally collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. I was alone, the darkness surrounding me. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing heart. But then I heard it, the sound of footsteps approaching. My eyes shot open, and I turned to see the figures emerging from the shadows, their faces twisted in anguish. "Come back," they whispered, their voices chilling me to the bone. "You belong with us." I stumbled back, terror gripping me. I couldn't let them take me. I turned to run again, but it was too late. The shadows enveloped me, and I felt their cold hands reaching for me, pulling me into the darkness. I fought and screamed, but it was no use. The darkness swallowed me whole, and I knew I was lost forever, trapped in the night with the shadows, just another lost soul on the last bus.